Good morning, everybody. We've got folks filtering in. We'll give everybody a couple or another minute, and then we'll get started. Okay, well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Cardes, and I'm excited to introduce Christian McGuigan, co-founder and CEO of Sycamore Studios, and for him to share the Sycamore Studios story and investment opportunity with you. This investment won't be on our direct series platform due to the timing of other deals that were already in our direct series pipeline. Nevertheless, we felt like this is something you would appreciate having the opportunity to consider, which is why we're hosting this call. Sycamore Studios builds family entertainment franchises by leveraging beloved intellectual property, world-class creative talent, and innovative production pipelines. The studio focuses on timeless stories rooted in beauty, truth, and goodness. Stories designed to do more than entertain and to help equip the next generation for their own hero's journey. I was introduced to Christian over 2 years ago and was impressed with him, his vision for Sycamore Studios, and the structure that he was building. We're also impressed with the progress Sycamore has made since our initial introduction. Christian and his team are raising investment dollars for the Sycamore Film Fund, which is targeting approximately 8 animated films. 1 is already in production, and 3 are in various stages of development, including Madeline, which they secured the animation rights to in February. To be clear, this investment is in film, and this is a venture-type investment, so there is risk. Christian will discuss how Sycamore seeks to mitigate that risk in multiple ways, including their diversified film portfolio, cost management, and multiple potential revenue streams associated with each film. We'll save time at the end for Q&A, and if you have questions, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the call. With that, I'll turn it over to Christian.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the whole 1900 team. Before I dive into the deck, just a brief 30,000-foot view of me and what have brought us to this point with Sycamore Studios. After law school, I worked in the independent film space and then ended up going to work for a studio called Participant Media. We made big movies like The Help and Lincoln, Green Book, Roma. We did $3.5 billion at the box office, and we won 21 Academy Awards, including Best Picture 2 times. And in that time, there was one film that we made that kind of rocked my world. It was a movie we made called Wonder. And we made this movie for about $25 million and ended up grossing a little over $300 million at the box office. And for me, I saw a formula that emerged in this film called Wonder. And one was we acquired intellectual property, which is a best-selling book that's still to this day taught in pretty much every 4th grade, 5th grade classroom, called Wonder. We brought an A-list team, including Julia Roberts, to the table to make the film. And then we controlled the budget by doing it for a price tag that pretty much guaranteed we'd at least hit break even if the movie wasn't wildly successful, but gave us the opportunity for tremendous upside in the case that it was successful, which happened in this case. And then there was another thing that really appealed to me about this film, which was it was made for the broadest possible audience, but it had a very specific resonance for the faith and family audience, which we've seen growing and growing and growing over time. And so we knew that from a core standpoint, that was a core marketing target that we could hit. And if they liked the movie, it was going to land and expand. I went to our CEO at the time and I said, I want to run the division who does these movies. And he stopped just short of patting me on the head and telling me that we don't do those types of movies. We do the types of movies that win Oscars, and regardless of how they perform at the box office. And so I was a little bit shocked by his response. I was also shocked by the fact that when they talked about reaching the Christian audience, I was the only person in a 350-person company that they could track down who could help give any insight to that audience. The fact that my name is Christian notwithstanding, I was the only church-going person in the entire company. At the same time, my co-founder of Sycamore Studios, Tim Reckert, he had just been nominated for an Academy Award for a short film that he had directed. And then he was directing a movie called The Star for Sony Animation. If any of you have children or grandchildren, it's one of the most beloved Christmas stories, animated feature film about the nativity, but from the point of view of the animals. And he was simultaneously in the development process, and the head of Sony Pictures, the entire studio, came to him and said, Act 3 is a little bit slow. Is there any way we could have Mary get kidnapped by Herod? And Tim responded, no, we can't do that. This is based on a very popular story from a very, very popular book. and we think the audience might have an issue. And the head of the studio was just shocked that they couldn't have Mary get kidnapped by Herod in the story of the Nativity. And so we knew there was something off in Hollywood. And I think we've all seen over the last decade and really fast forward over the last 5 years what has happened in this space in understanding that they're leaving not only a lot of money on the table, but they've been really incinerating in some ways a lot of brand goodwill, which in the Walt Disney Company's case has been built up over 102 years. And so as we started looking at Sycamore Studios, and I'll switch over to our deck now, we saw an opportunity, and we saw an opportunity that really was encapsulated and the importance and the urgency of this in a quote that I had read, which was in the 1930s, there was a theater critic who said that movie theaters are the new church of the masses. They're the place where everyone sits huddled in the dark, looking up at people in the light, telling them what it means to be human. And we thought about that idea and that quote, and specifically what that meant in our childhood and in the childhood of our own children. And we thought to ourselves, well, if you're anything like my children, those stories, when you sit huddled in the dark looking into the light, don't stay on the screen. If your children or your grandchildren love a movie or a series, they take it off the screen and they become it. They don't just like princesses, they become a princess. They don't just like Star Wars, they become Jedi. And God help us, Blippy, if any of you have small children, hopefully that's just a stage that doesn't last too long. They also know that if they want to become a warrior princess like my daughter does, she can, as long as her mother does not find out that she took her new fur vest in order to make that happen. And if you want to slay dragons, at which point, at some point in your life, you were in charge of slaying dragons, you knew, like my 3-year-old, all you needed was your knight's helmet and your diaper. Now, at Sycamore, we didn't found this company just to serve our children, but we could have. Our leadership team, we've actually got 16 children under the age of 10. So we understand our audience. And ultimately, we understand the economic opportunity that's in front of us because we know that the market for animated IP is 3 times the size of all of the music industry and live action IP combined. Now, that's a big number and that's a big statistic. But if you start to think about it in more granular standpoint, you can see how we get to that number. You take a series like Despicable Me. The brand value alone is estimated at about $12.5 billion. If you have any children or maybe yourself, you might be part of the 56 billion minutes of Bluey that were watched in 2024. That number has only grown. And if you have any children under the age of 10, they've probably been exposed to Paw Patrol. And over the last 9 years, Paw Patrol, a series really focused on preschoolers, has done $15 billion in retail sales just in the last 9 years. So we know the economic opportunity is massive in this space. And Walt Disney, who really was the founder of that Disney flywheel that has the opportunity to have the entertainment at the core, and in success, that entertainment throws off additional revenue streams, understood that as well. But we also saw another opportunity, which is this values-aligned entertainment gap. 135 million Americans believe that the current entertainment that is being offered to them does not reflect their values and their beliefs. 80 million Americans last year alone avoided Walt Disney Entertainment because it was made by the Walt Disney Company. That's a phrase I never thought I would say. In the most recent Harris poll, Disney was tracking just above Taco Bell as far as brand trust, which if you trust Taco Bell, something has gone terribly wrong in your life. And there's already 73 million Christian households just here in the United States of America looking for values aligned entertainment. Now, that's important because if you say, well, what are we actually delivering to those kids now? It's really prominent because we live at a time when only 14% of 3 to 5-year-olds know how to tie their shoes, but 89% of them know how to work a smartphone. So we're living in a time and space where more children and more families are receiving more storytelling than any time in history. So the question is, what does that entertainment look like, and why has this brand value been so diminished of late? So just a quick, I have a whole long presentation with videos and the like, but just to give you a snapshot of what this looks like right now. The show Muppet Babies. This was a show that I grew up with as a little kid. It's not rocket science. It's the Muppets, but they're babies. My favorite was this character, Gonzo, who you might remember. Disney relaunched the Muppet Babies series, which I was very excited about to show my kids, hey, this is the one that Daddy loved, until we got to the episode where Gonzo actually identifies as a woman, as Gonzarella, and is celebrated by the various Muppet Babies for being so brave to transition in a preschool cartoon. Not a joke, actually happened. The Proud Family, very popular cartoon on Disney in the early 2000s, African-American family, very inclusive in all the right, wonderful ways. When they relaunched the show, kids in the show actually do a performance called America Was Built on Racism. Again, this is a show really focused on early elementary school kids. Sabrina the Teenage Witch, one of my favorite shows when I was like a preteen teen. They relaunched it on Netflix. And as you can tell by this photo, you might not be surprised that the show was sued by a church. You might be surprised to find out that it was the Church of Satan who sued the show for copyright infringement. In this episode, Sabrina actually writes her name in the Book of the Beast, pledging her allegiance to Satan. Slightly different show. The early 90s, late 90s, Blues Clues pretty much raised an entire generation of millennials. Nickelodeon launched a new Blues Clues where Blue goes to a pride parade. And if you look closely on the second or third float at the pride parade, Blue gets to see mastectomy scars for the first time with a family. So interesting entertainment. And what we posited is, what if families didn't have to choose between the entertainment that they love and the values that they live by? And for us at Sycamore Studios, what our goal is ultimately is to become the most trusted brand in kids and family entertainment. Trusted not just for the content. There's trustworthy content out there that just isn't very good, but ultimately trusted for the quality. We want to be able to compete with the Disneys and the Pixars and the DreamWorks on a quality level, not just on a trust level. And ultimately, that's the way that we say it is, we want to create entertainment so good that you as an adult don't want to leave the room, but it's so good that you can. And as a father of 4 kids under the age of 10, that's not something I can do all the time. I can count on 2 hands how many times I've had to dive in front of the television like a Secret Service agent just to try to avoid a conversation that either my children or I wasn't ready to have. And I can't let a studio in Hollywood force that conversation. So ultimately, our strategy at Sycamore is to build franchises by leveraging beloved IP. So we want to de-risk it by saying we already know that people love these stories and these characters. We bring world-class talent to the table. So it's not, hey, this is the person who goes to Christian's church or his cousin who really loves storytelling, but let's get the best and brightest in the business who have a track record of performing in the past. Put it together with a production pipeline that doesn't cost hundreds of millions of dollars and essentially dictate that the film has to do billions of dollars to justify itself. And then ultimately focus on timeless stories that resonate deeply with those values driven, or what Hollywood calls heartland audiences, while still maintaining that broad commercial appeal. So some people have asked us, Christian, is Sycamore a faith-based studio? We're all people of faith who run the studio, so I can't really separate the two. I don't take that hat off when I'm doing business, but we're not making animated Bible stories. That's usually the question that they have to ask. Where we see the biggest opportunity market-wise is to create general entertainment content, but again, with that specific resonance. So you could say faith inspired, you could say values inspired. When we're talking to our contemporaries and our counterparts in Hollywood, we talk about timeless values. And ultimately, it comes down to a test. We call it the middle seat test. We said, if this is a issue that you wouldn't want to have a debate on a middle seat of an airplane with a stranger about, it probably doesn't belong in children's entertainment. That's where we set the bar. Now, we try to elevate it with the type of storytelling and the type of IP that we're bringing to the table, but ultimately that's what we try to do. And the old franchise model that Walt Disney and a lot of the other folks really endeavored to grow and change has become really, really difficult to execute. It's expensive, it's slow, and ultimately, as we've just seen, it's culturally misaligned. So one, it's extremely expensive and time consuming. This is something that's kept a lot of competitors out of the animation space where we are. It usually takes about 5 to 7 years to make an animated feature film. A movie like Frozen that Disney did took well over a decade to create. The cost itself, Disney is essentially incapable of making a movie for under $150 million. It's sort of tantamount to going to Apple and saying, can you make an iPhone for $100? By first principles, it's possible. They just are not structured from an economic incentive or even from a corporate structuring to pull that off. Second, there's a really high risk of failure. As Chris pointed at the top of the call, entertainment is always very, very risky. Although most of the time when people are investing in entertainment, they're investing in the same way that they go to the Kentucky Derby for the first time, which is the gray horse looks pretty. I don't know much about horse racing. He made it to the race. I'm sure he's going to do okay. Or I have a buddy who told me he knows the jockey and he says it's a great horse. There's a number of challenges in that, in which there are 20 horses in the race, sometimes 25. But particularly, you're still working in entertainment and media where that horse just might not feel like running that day, even if it is the favorite. And we can all find movies and series where it's stacked with Oscar-winning talent. It has the best director in the business. They dumped a ton of money into it, and it just wasn't very good. So what we've tried to figure out is how can we de-risk that high risk of failure as best as we possibly can, both through our investment structure and through our mandate for the type of entertainment that we're making. And then that values misalignment. So the Walt Disney Company, that most estimates show that they lost $1 billion just alone on Snow White and some of the crazy stuff that happened here. And that's been continued over a number of different films where they've had to either reshoot them, they've had to go back and re-edit them, and in some cases have just written them off as total losses because they've created entertainment with certain scenes that even if people aren't particularly conservative or even particular values based, they don't think it's appropriate for their, as an example, in the movie Lightyear, for their preschooler to see two women kiss in a movie. That just creates conversations that makes parenting harder, not easier. And so what we've done from a structural standpoint with Sycamore is trying to have the venture-like upside on non-venture timelines and do our best to de-risk what is historically a very risky space. So the first is that cost-effective production. This is a whole nother talk I can give you about how we're trying to innovate in that animation production pipeline. AI plays a role in it, although it is not a prominent role. It will grow over time, but AI for feature animation and series animation is really not at that prime time level yet, but it will eventually get there. What we've figured out to do is to make a Hollywood quality theatrical animated film for about a tenth of the cost. We end up coming in right around $20–25 million in a gross budget. We're able to maximize incentives. I can talk a little bit more about the soft monies. Fortunately or unfortunately, virtually every movie that you see, every show that you love is not made in the United States of America. And that's because the production is subsidized heavily in foreign countries. Our first film that we're doing right now, it's actually a Texas-based studio called Real Effects who's producing it, but we're making the entire film in Montreal, Canada. Animation is slightly different because we need the talent base in the very specific area. We're not like a traveling circus, like a live action film where you just go and shoot it in different places. We need to have that animation talent, and then we need to look for where we have the best incentives. So a place like Canada, we get about 33% of our budget back from the Canadian government. Belgium, where we have an animation studio partner, we get about 40% of our budget back, and that actually cash flows before we go into production. Places like Spain, England, Ireland, all very, very competitive tax credits, France as well. And then we've been able to accelerate our production pipeline. Some of that is through just basic business principles, others, some more innovative elements that we brought to that pipeline. So instead of that 5-year window it takes to make one of these films, we've actually got our production pipeline down to about 20 months. And we think in films 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be able to condense that even more as well. The second is beloved IP. This is that example where I wish I could come up with the best idea for a brand new character, and I know our team is capable of it, and we'll build that capability over time. But in order to de-risk it at this point, we say, well, let's start with beloved IP. And taking a page from the Walt Disney Company, if you look at the first 12, 13 films that Walt Disney made, they were all folk tales, fairy tales, or books. Even Bambi was based on a best-selling novel. It's the best way to de-risk it to say, we already know this is beloved IP. We already know there's an established audience for it. And with a lot of the IP that we're acquiring and that we're producing, it's multi-generational. We call it nostalgia. It's nostalgic in that this is a property that I loved and I'm introducing it to my children. So that comes with a brand of trust. That also comes with a multi-generational love. You even saw this happen with a movie like Barbie, where you had grandmothers, mothers, and granddaughters going to see the movie together. So I can talk a little bit more about that specifically. We also have our own internal incubation where we are trying to experiment and create our own IP over time, but taking minuscule bets, doing it in the YouTube space, trying to really test which brands resonate with audiences and if they would actually rise to the level of going into actual production there. The third part of that risk mitigation strategy relates to the film fund itself. So we call it a film fund, which traditionally a film fund is you're investing in the fund, it's investing in a bunch of movies, and you're seeing the same power law dynamics that you would see in oil and gas or multifamily investments. You're trying to spread the risk across a number of bets, knowing that not all of them will be home runs, but hopefully most of them are base hits. And if there is a strikeout, it's made up for by a home run that you get on one of those other investments. The fund itself, we set up in a really unique way. One, to make it as normal and less exotic as possible, as a lot of times you see in this space. I'll talk a little bit about the fee structure. We've tried to de-risk that as much as we possibly can and be fully aligned with our investors. And then thirdly, what we did was, which is very unique in the space, is we took all the revenue related to all of the IP and brought that back to the fund. Usually that's carved off and put into a separate investment entity. So you've invested in the movies. If the movies do well and then those do well on streaming, then you make money. But if we sell $15 billion worth of dolls like Paw Patrol, you don't participate in that. That didn't work for us. We wanted to make sure that our investors are side by side with us across the board. So all of the revenues related to all the properties and all the IP, not only does that ownership sit in the fund, but all of those revenues come back to the fund. And then lastly is the timeless values, because we could execute great IP, we could have A-list talent, we could have it with the most innovative production pipeline with soft monies. But ultimately, if we're at the behest of the studios where they are forcing us to put objectionable content into our films, it's not worth running the business in the first place. And so everything our investors know is that they can go to bed at night knowing that those timeless values, that movies that they're going to be proud to show their children, and they don't have to actually even be in the room if they want to show those, are going to give us that opportunity. The team itself that we've put together to execute this, myself, I've told you a little bit about my background. Tim Reckert, who's my co-founder and our chief creative officer, he's the gentleman that was nominated for an Academy Award and directed the movie The Star, also did projects at DreamWorks and Netflix Animation. Cooper Waterman, who's our head of production and distribution, his family company, Waterman Entertainment, they produced all of the Alvin and the Chipmunks films and all of the Stuart Little movies and Casper the Friendly Ghost. So they did about $2.5 billion at the box office. The gentleman who oversees our accounting, Tim DeLoso, was the former VP and treasurer at Warner Brothers. And then we also just hired in the last 6 months a gentleman named Saxton Washburn, who's our head of development, who comes from Netflix Animation, where he was for about 5.5 years. And if there's any Texas Tech grads on the phone, he's a guns up grad. And then our advisory board is interesting as well. A lot of folks who get into this space and in independent space are sort of going it alone. But when we put this company together and put the strategy together, we were really enthused with the amount of folks who stepped up to not only become advisory board members, but most of them investors as well. Folks like Jeremy Latcham. Jeremy's also producing our second and third films that we have in our slate. He's a former SVP of Marvel Studios. He produced every Iron Man, Avengers, and Guardians of the Galaxy film. He's produced 6 of the highest grossing 12 films in the history of Hollywood. Chuck Hubner, the former CEO of Hasbro Interactive and ran the global gaming studio for Activision. Rob Steffens, former CFO of Marvel. Mike Flaherty founded Walden Media. If you've watched any of the Chronicles of Narnia films, that came from Walden Media. Folks from Pixar, Netflix, and even down to the technological and gaming side with the VP of design at Meta, Josh Toe, who's also an investor. And ultimately, as Chris mentioned, we're doing it. We're putting the strategy into action. Our first film is a Dr. Dolittle adaptation, the first ever animated Dr. Dolittle film. And why do we pick Dr. Dolittle? Well, the movies have done $1.5 billion at the box office, the live action films. They've won Academy Awards, and the books itself have sold over 100 million copies. But there's an entire generation of kids where if you tell them, hey, do you know about a zoologist who can talk to animals? Their minds are completely blown because they haven't been exposed to the Dolittle franchise yet. And the best way to onboard them is through animation. Then we looked at, all right, well, who's the team we're going to bring on board to this? We hired Cal Brunker and Bob Barlin. They're the writers of the last 2 and the next Paw Patrol movie, films that have done over $500 million at the box office and premiered at #1 globally across the world. So they wrote our screenplay. And then to run our 4-minute mile in our first film, our chief creative officer, Tim Reckert, is directing. And then what we look at is the franchise potential. Usually it takes multiple films in order to justify that franchise, but when you have the awareness of IP like Dr. Dolittle, and then you think of the 83 million Americans who visit zoos and aquariums every year, and we have the zoologists who they all know by name, there's a tremendous amount of opportunities across a bunch of brand activations as it relates to Dr. Dolittle. So Dolittle is currently in production. It's about 2.5 months into production, and we're wrapping production in Q3 of next year. The second is a book series called Z to the Space Girl. 3 books in the series, all #1 New York Times bestsellers. It was previously with Peter Chernin, who is one of the biggest producers in Hollywood, who was trying to produce it as a live action film. When Disney bought 20th Century Fox, we were able to come in and get the IP back. This is another good example of we have the IP, we've acquired it, it has a beloved audience, and then what is the team that we're actually bringing to the fore? Jeremy Latcham, who I mentioned before from Marvel Entertainment, is our executive producer. And then when it came to who are we going to get to write the script, who's actually going to take these books and develop it into the best possible film, we hired a gentleman by the name of Ken Dario. Ken is the most successful writer by box office in the history of animation. He's done over $6.5 billion at the box office. He created the Despicable Me series that I mentioned earlier, wrote all 4 Despicable Me films. He wrote The Secret Life of Pets, The Lorax, Horton Hears a Who, wildly successful. And was not only attracted to the property itself and wanting to adapt it into a film, but also attracted to what we were doing at Sycamore and understanding that in making good, true, and beautiful entertainment, we have an opportunity to make content for generations to come. again, tons of franchise potential there. And when we look at franchise potential, it's not just is there number a series in the books, but ultimately that's great if we can start there. But ultimately, does it create a world and a world of characters that in success we know that we can build off of, not just for future films, but also for series, for games, for other adaptations as well. The third in the series that we've acquired is a book series called The Investigators. If any of you have little boys under the age of 12, I can almost guarantee they have read at least 3 or 4 of these books. They just surpassed 5 million copies sold. There's 7 more books to come in the series. The next one is actually June 2nd. The previous one, last October, went to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list when it was released. And it's created an entire world where it's now, I think, about the 3rd or 4th best-selling book series for kids. So you can see a little bit of a theme where we're picking classic IP and mixing it with contemporary IP as well. That's going into development really in the next month as we develop the script and what that activation looks like. And we're in talks with some top Hollywood talent as far as who the voices and the characters for those two alligators are going to be. And then, ultimately the goal, if you're in the kids entertainment business, is how can we possibly get our hands on that blue chip IP, that Peter Rabbit, Paddington, Curious George, Madeline, the type of IP that we know is timeless, that we know has affected hundreds of millions of families and will have an opportunity. It's very, very difficult because all the good IP for the most part is spoken for. It's very, very difficult. But we were very fortunate in that about a month ago, we announced that we won the rights to Madeline. It was not an easy negotiation, partially because our negotiating partner is a 90-year-old woman who Madeline was based on. Her father, Ludwig Bemelmans, created the series and was based on his only daughter, Barbara. And the only reason it's not called Barbara is because nothing rhymes with Barbara. And so not only did we negotiate and win the rights to the animation rights and the live action series rights and all of the merchandising and licensing that goes along with that, but we were very fortunate in that we were also able to negotiate a partnership with the family to control the classic merchandising rights. And what that means is, historically, like for a property like The Investigators, once we make our movie or our series, we own the underlying trademarks of all those characters, and we can build off all of our merchandising and franchising related to those characters. When it comes to Madeline, we can do that, but we can also build off merchandising related to all of the books and the classic merchandise. So we are already in conversations now with new licensees to actually bring that to life. And we see a real sleeping giant in untapped merchandising with Madeline, mainly because that wonderful woman, Barbara Bemelmans, who's now coming up on 91 years old, for the last 25, 30 years, she just hasn't put any licenses in market. She was sort of overwhelmed by the experience. She had a couple of bad Hollywood experiences. And so currently, right now, there are only 2 licenses in market globally for Madeline. And we have a vision for at least 200, 250 of those global licenses to be activated across every product category, from adult clothes to children's apparel to pajamas to plush dolls to toys to experiences to tea sets to ponchos. You name it, we've thought of it, and we're going to find out ways to really bring that franchise to life for generations to come. And so I had alluded to that flywheel. It's really what Walt Disney created when it came to Snow White. People think that the Walt Disney Company started merchandising childhood well into the 90s, but it started in 1937. It even started before then with Mickey Mouse. But as I've told some folks, after that movie came out, just in one product category, Walt Disney sold 12 million commemorative glasses for Snow White. And so we've looked at the same structure. So that first step is, how do we acquire or incubate globally recognized IP or validated new IP through our incubator system? The second part is developing and produce it, low cost, high quality, leveraging the best animation studios that we can, maximizing those rebates so that we de-risk that capital stack. The third part is distribution. So all available platforms. All of our films are set for theatrical distribution, but we have to see what's the best opportunity financially and from a broad brand building perspective to see, does it make sense to go straight to Netflix, or should we push for that theatrical distribution? The most watched entertainment in the history of Netflix is a movie called K-pop Demon Hunters that came out last year. Nothing comes close. And that premiered on Netflix. They actually ended up putting it in theaters later. But we look at that distribution profile. And then lastly is that franchising and merchandising. How do we expand the revenue streams related to that brand and that property specifically? And when it comes to something like Madeline and even The Investigators, we're in a slightly different position, and that we can expand and start laying the groundwork from a licensing and merchandising standpoint well in advance of the film coming out. But that's ultimately what we're pushing for. To see how that comes to life on something like Doolittle, we look at this historical box office revenue, 100 plus million bucks sold. We produce it with Real Effects, who's our animation partner in Canada. Real Effects' last 5 films have been for Netflix, Paramount, Disney, Amazon, and another one for Paramount. So again, studio track record that they're looking for, are committed to the type of innovation that we're looking for. Then we look at that distribution side of it. We're going to be done in Q3 of next year, and we could potentially distribute as early as Q4 of 2027, but more likely probably in the spring of 28. We're in conversations with a number of potential distributors related to our entire slate, but also specifically with Doolittle as well. And then lastly is that franchising and merchandising. We've begun to have some of those conversations with zoos and aquariums all around the country, and finding out ways that we can have, product integrations and licensing beyond that footprint as well. The fund terms themselves, and again, we'll give access to the data room, who anyone is interested in going deep as wide as you would like. But what we really tried to do was, inspired by that, let's be shoulder to shoulder with our investors. We said we're going to create a very normal 2 and 20 fund, where we, as the GP, have 20% of the carry after a 12% pref and that return of capital. But we wanted to change something specifically, which was the fee structure. So many people feel like they're being bled on the top line with the fees. And so a normal 2 and 20 fund being a 2% yearly management fee during the investment period that drops to 1% for the remainder of the life of the fund. For us, we said that's not good enough for us. We want to have one single 2% fee for the investment period and one single 1% fee for the remainder life of the fund. So there's only 3% in committed capital in fees coming off the top of the fund. Something that was very, very important to us. We set our investment minimum at $500,000. Our average is right around that, a little bit higher. But obviously we have discretion, and because of our what fans we are of Chris and Matt and the team, Erica at 1900, we're happy to bring on investors at any level that they're comfortable with on that side. And that investment in the fund is an investment in all of that IP. If you're investing in the Sycamore Film Fund, you're investing in the ownership of the Madeline brand, as an example. And anything that we produce with Madeline, anything that we produce in the plush doll space, the merchandising space, all of that revenue comes directly back to our participation in that revenue comes directly back to the fund. The actual film financing structure, I alluded to it a little bit. Again, we don't have to get too deep into the weeds, but the way that we generally look at our feature film capital stack structure is it usually drops into about a third. A third of our budget comes back from incentives and those soft monies from the various countries. For example, in Canada, we get about 33% of our budget back. That's banked by the Bank of Canada, 100 cents on the dollar that we receive back for all of our spend in Canada. The second comes from the capital stack from our fund or any co-investors who come on board on the film specifically. And then the last third is what are called foreign pre-sales. And this is a traditional way that a lot of films are produced and financed, but specifically in the animation space because of its popularity and availability in foreign territories. And basically how this works is you're able to take the film before it's made or in process of being made and sell off the distribution rights territory by territory around the world. And what they do is provide a minimum cash guarantee for that right to be the exclusive distributor of, say, Dr. Doolittle in the territory of France. And that can be banked and then applied back to the budget. And then anything that you get over that minimum guarantee in said territory is a revenue split with the distributor. A traditional way that most films are financed, but specifically for animation, because animation is in a really unique space where it translates well to every territory in the world. There's a reason why animated films generally perform very, very well globally, because they don't have to be dubbed in the traditional sense where you're losing something in the translation, but everything can be dubbed into that local language without losing anything in that translation. And it's also something that we look at from a global priority with that IP, what is actually going to translate. And then our fund return targets, again, we have plenty of background and models related to this, but what we really tried to do is be as realistic, but also as conservative as we could possibly be. Unfortunately, and some of you on this call may have been witness to some folks pitching entertainment projects, and let's just say they oftentimes have very rose-colored glasses when they're coming together with their projections. They'll take oftentimes outlier successes and model against those outlier successes and say, well, this movie was made for $5 million and it made 250 million. That's what we're going to do numerous times. We obviously have a model that's a lot different than that. But what we really tried to do is identify what would happen in a downside protected scenario where the films do fine. This is not a all films fail model, but let's just assume we don't sell any merchandise, right? It's not a realistic assumption per se, particularly with something like Madeline. But let's just assume the films all are able to perform and there's licensing opportunities, but we don't do any merchandise. Then we look into the base case scenario, which is the films do pretty well. We're still benchmarking well below industry averages. Their video on demand or streaming licensing fees, we're still banking much lower than comparable benchmarks, but we see an opportunity there in that base case. And then the upside, we start looking at, okay, the films are not only performing well, but we have one or two films that break out as genuine franchise properties with strong retail licensing. Now, even in those scenarios, we're not mapping against something like Zootopia 2 that the Walt Disney Company did and did close to $2 billion at the box office, right? Or something like Cars that the Walt Disney and Pixar made. The movies did very well. They made about $400 million across three films, but they've made almost $20 billion in merchandising, really at like a base case level. We're not mapping against those. We're mapping against something like Paddington, which is a very close comp to Madeline, which now has over $1 billion in brand value just with that single property. A very similar property, a beloved property, not known widely beyond the book series, but an opportunity to really expand across musical theater, theme park integrations, merchandising, apparel, toys, across the board. And so that's ultimately what we're looking for is what is that net licensing percentage and that library value that we're looking at as well. And then lastly, I would say, and then we can open it up to the questions. One of our investors, who's a big defense tech investor, he asked me, he said, Christian, what are the stakes? And I didn't understand the question. I said, what do you mean, what are the stakes? He goes, what are the stakes if I don't invest? He's like, I understand if I don't invest in this drone technology, that if we get into a battle with country X, we could, potentially be fighting with one arm behind our back. And I said, okay, I understand the question. I said, well, when I think about the stakes, my children and a lot of your children, a lot of your grandchildren, they're in the Gen Alpha category. They're like 0 to 10. They haven't been spoken for yet. But Gen Z is an interesting group to look at. They're the kids that are like, right now about 10 to 20, 10 to 22. They're the ones who've been really raised in this new Hollywood environment, in this new version of Disney, in an entertainment landscape that's digital first. And they've had a steady diet of this for some time. And so when I look at the stakes, I look at, well, let's look at what happened to Gen Z. 16% of them say that they're proud to live in the United States. 30% of them believe that Marxism is worthy of support. 34% of them have no religious affiliation. We call them the nones, Nones. They don't identify as religious at all. 40% of them believe that marriage is an outdated institution. And sadly, between 2017 and 2021, there was a 300% increase in Gen Z with gender dysphoria. And so when I think about those numbers and I think about my own children and my own grandchildren to come and your children and your grandchildren, understanding that those kids are not spoken for yet. And they have to grow up in great families, which I know y'all are doing, but I can only control my family. They have to go to great schools. And there's luckily been a renaissance of wonderful schools where we love the school that our children go to, but they also have to have great entertainment. Because if the entertainment is not great and it does not reflect those values that you're trying to imbue in them in your family and in their schools, the whole thing can be scuttled. And when I think back to that original quote, that idea of those people sitting in the dark, looking up into the light, trying to figure out not only what it means to be human, but what it means to be a child of God, that's my 3-year-old. He's the one who's currently right now sitting in the dark, looking up into the light and trying to figure it out. And we believe at Sycamore Studios, we have not only the goal of doing that, but we have the responsibility of doing it, because there's so many folks who will just point and say, oh, Disney did it again, or so-and-so did it again, and we can't watch anything, and there's nothing good. And isn't it, why don't we have any new franchises? For us, we just said, we need to step into this. This is the opportunity that we have. We have the talent to meet the opportunity. We've had a tremendous number of investors who've come to meet the call. And for us, we see it as a responsibility to build the next great entertainment, not only franchise, but company, as it were. So that's the 30,000-foot view. Happy to answer any questions and continue from there.
Christian, one question something you might be able to address is timing
Sure.
on the releases of your movies or the films. And I understand that, looking out over the next 3 to 4 years, there's a shortage in the pipeline. And so from a market opportunity, the timing could be beneficial with what you're bringing to market.
Yeah, yeah, and the conversations that we've had, even with traditional Hollywood studios and distributors, I'll give you a specific example. We were talking with Paramount, and Paramount does not have a single animated feature for 2027. I take that back, for 2028. They don't have a single film. And partially because where we see that opportunity in the pipeline and the timing and the structuring of what we call, when I say pipeline, I mean our animation pipeline. What do we put into the beginning and what do we get at the end? They're still on that 5 to 7 year timeline. And so you look at a movie like Zootopia, which was a massive, massive hit. It took them 7 years to come out with Zootopia 2. For us, what we've set forth is to have at least one film in market every year for the next 8 years, starting in 2027, 2028. That's ultimately the goal, both from an economic standpoint, because we're meeting a need, and secondarily from a cultural impact standpoint. We can't have an impact on the culture if we release a movie every 7 years. And if you think about the impact, both culturally and economically, that Pixar has had over its 35, 40 year history, that's with releasing one movie a year, every year. And they actually missed one year where they had a film that wasn't ready for prime time. And so when we look at that, you can see it. If any of you have small children, they probably love going to the movie theater when there's something that they want to watch and there's something that you want to take them to. But those opportunities are few and far between. So what we found now is there's a big push sort of industry wide in trying to get more people back to the theater. But the only, I guess you could say, there's three genres of entertainment that audiences consistently show up for. One is horror films, which I have no interest in seeing or producing, but they can be a very good business. The second is sort of like the big budget Top Gun, Formula One, where you have a brand that is very solid that's being released at scale. And then the last is animated feature films. If it weren't for animated feature films, realistically speaking, we might not actually have movie theaters in existence anymore, or at least not at the scale that we have today. It's the one genre that will consistently, with high quality entertainment, not only kids and their families will show up, they'll show up multiple times. We also have another feature film in development that we're trying to crack right now based on Pecos Bill, the folktale of Pecos Bill, with the writers of the Minecraft movie, which did $1 billion at the box office, was the #2 film in theaters last year. So yeah, there's a tremendous opportunity from an economic standpoint, and particularly with our ability to consistently both create and distribute high quality content. It's been a very attractive proposition, at least in this early stage, with more of the traditional distributors.
Following on that, can you talk just for a minute about how you see transition from box office to streaming and the opportunity set for that, and what those revenue streams can look like, and the interest from groups like Netflix and other online streaming services?
Yeah, so there has been a pullback. Ultimately, if you look at sort of industry wide, what you saw in the streaming race, you guys are probably familiar, even if you don't follow the industry closely, of the streaming wars that you would hear about between Disney and Netflix and Amazon and Apple. The streaming wars are essentially over, and Netflix won. Netflix won going away. And so Netflix is at a point now where their churn, meaning how many people sign up and cancel, their churn's minimal. It's 2%. Where you look at something like Peacock, which is owned by NBC, their monthly churn is about 10%, meaning they have to not only replace those 10%, but try to add to them every single year. That being said, they've pulled back pretty significantly on the amount of films that they're both originally commissioning, which you could say, well, that maybe that's not great, but it's actually beneficial for a company like Sycamore in that they've increased the number of films that they're licensing. So there's opportunities with them, whether a film is going to go theatrically first, which those films usually perform better on the service, but they do not have the exclusivity of a Netflix only or an Amazon only or an Apple only release. And so there's opportunities. There's two pathways. There's an opportunity where you go directly to the streamers, where we've had some of these conversations already, and they say, we're going to take a 3 to 5 year license on the film. But we want it exclusively on the platform. We want to launch Dr. Dolittle, as an example, on the Netflix platform. Now, after that 3 to 5 year license, we can relicense to Netflix, or we can license to any number of streamers. That's why when you log on to Netflix and you see a film and it says leaving soon, that's all it means. It means that their license has either has not been renewed or they're going elsewhere. The conversations that we've been in to date and that we're in actively currently as we speak are with groups like Paramount, Lionsgate, and Sony. And what we're trying to figure out now, and we're trying to balance in these early conversations, is does it make sense to uh, do have a potential different distributor for each film, or to have an overall sort of slate distribution deal with one of these companies. And we're in a beneficial position right now across a number of aspects. One, the fact that we have capital to catalyze our own productions. That's very, very rare. Usually it's people coming to the studios saying, will you pay us to make a script? And then we'll come back to you with the script. And then will you actually pay to make the movie and market the film? We're coming and saying we have our own capital and our own capital sources to actually make this into a reality, whether you're here or not. So that's one benefit. Uh, the second benefit is the output number. So we could say we can get you a film every year for the next 8 years. That's very attractive to them as well. And then the quality attraction to say, if we wanted to release these in theaters because we think there's a theatrical opportunity there, there's going to be an opportunity for the Sycamore movies to play theatrically. Generally, in that pathway, the film comes out theatrically, and the licensing revenue for the next 3 to 5 years is usually somewhere between 10 to 20% of what that box office take would be. So you take a movie like The Sound of Freedom, did $250 million at the box office. I believe Amazon paid the license on that film for about $25 million. And then it can be continually relicensed and relicensed and relicensed. I was part of a transaction when I was in after law school to acquire the TV rights for the the Rocky series. And we paid the company, I think, $88 million to have the exclusive right for Rocky for 6 months. And then after that 6 months, they can go license it somewhere else. So you think about the timelessness, not just of this type of entertainment, but the timelessness of animation in particular. To go back to that Snow White example, there's no other movie from 1937 that you're showing your children. And I would argue there's no other movie from 1937 that's showing in your home. But Snow White, because of how great it was, and the timelessness of the story and the nature. Same things for movies in the mid 90s. If you look at a movie like The Lion King, it's as relevant now for your kids and grandkids as it was for me when the movie came out in the 90s when I was a preteen. There's a timelessness that you don't see in other genres of entertainment. It never feels dated. The haircuts don't feel dated. The language doesn't feel dated. There's a timelessness to the animation itself. And so that puts us in a unique position from a distribution standpoint as well.
Thank you. Another question that's come in is how much has been committed to date? Talking about the targets and then also
Sure.
the extended target, and would you pull back investors' commitments if oversubscribed?
So we have the ability. So we're targeting a $30 million raise in the fund. We can raise up to 55 million if oversubscribed. Right now we're at 23 million. We've got a couple of outsized investors who are in diligence. Again, I don't soft circle anything until it comes in. But anywhere in and around that $30 million range, we will be guaranteed to at least make the first 5 films. And like I said, all of the films are set up for sequels, the way in which we've set up those franchises. And so we don't anticipate being oversubscribed to a point where there would have to be any return of capital before. It would be a great problem to have. But I think even with a couple of the outsized checks with some large sort of quasi-institutional investors who are in diligence, I think we would be right in that sweet spot of 55 million.
Okay. Another question is how much of the fund is committed by the internal Sycamore team?
Oh, great question. Yeah. So we're all relatively young fathers of multiple children, but we ended up putting in, I think, just under 1% of whatever available invested capital that we have, and then building this over time. We've burned the ships behind us. Tim, as a successful director, is exclusive to Sycamore. Cooper Waterman, who had multiple projects, exclusive to Sycamore. Myself, exclusive to Sycamore. We've been building this business over the last 2.5 years. And like I said, on the fee structure, we try to really reflect that, where not only are we not getting rich off fees, our overhead is actually covered through our studio entity, which was completely separate. So we're covering our overhead, and we don't own any of the IP. That IP is all owned at the fund level.
Great. Thank you. Another question is, can you talk a little bit about exit timing? So I believe it's an 8-year fund, and talk about what exit timing looks like, return of capital as well.
Yeah, there's opportunities. I mean, some of it, to go back to our Kentucky Derby analogy, some of it depends on that gray horse might win the first race. And if Doolittle overperforms in a position, we modeled Doolittle. We think Doolittle is going to be a hit. We think it's going to perform very, very well. But in our financial model, we modeled it as a dry hole for our oil and gas investors on the call. Not because we anticipate it or we believe it's going to be a dry hole, but we wanted to be realistic in the first film out of the bat and how we're structuring that. That being said, if it's not, that being said, if also some of the licensing, merchandising, cash flowing for Madeline comes in early, there's opportunities for distributions in that first 3 to 4 year window. But we mapped it out on an 8 year time horizon and much more of a venture like structure where at the close of that fund structure, we see couple of different options, and some of it will depend on performance. Where we could do a full library sale, where all of the properties that were created, all of that IP, we're able to sell in whole, or a more of a hybrid approach in part, where we have an opportunity to say we're going to sell this part of the library and these assets, but something like potentially Madeline could be rolled into a fund two if people want to be capped out, but it could be rolled into a fund two. It could be rolled into a more of an evergreen entity that folks are continue to recoup from for many years to come. But we want to see some of that performance timing based, but ultimately thinking of it more of a venture like fund where at the close of it, all of the assets are pooled and then exited in the way that's most beneficial to the investors.
And if it was rolled into another fund but voted on by the investors, there would be an exit opportunity for those that said, "Hey, it's been great, but I'm ready to exit."
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
That's
Hey,
correct.
it's Matt. Just a quick question. Switching from the revenue side of the house to the cost side, could you
Sure.
talk about budgets, how you set those, enforce them?
Yep.
We hear about overruns all the time in some of these film strategies, but in animation, is it less risky because you can set a more reasonable budget and not run over? Maybe talk
Yes.
about that.
Yes. I would argue in some cases it's not less risky if you're the Walt Disney Company, because the Walt Disney Company because they have the time, energy, and we'll call it history of experimenting. They'll
Mhm.
sometimes say we're going to create a character that is made purely of fire, and they'll say we don't have the animation technology to do that. And they say, well, then let's experiment and let's build it and let's commit to it. All the major studios have put sometimes billions, most of the times hundreds of millions of dollars into their own proprietary software technology. We avoid that completely. We are not in the animation business per se, so we do not employ full time any animators. All of the animation that we do, we behave more like a architectural firm in that we find the covered land play, we develop the architectural plans all the way down to the fit and fixture of the sinks. But when it comes to framing the home, when it comes to swinging the hammers, that's outsourced to a third party animation studio. And there's a number of reasons for that. And one of which is to your question, Matt, which is it allows us to be able to control costs that much more with a third party, because we're able to bid out the project to multiple studios. We don't have to worry about the carrying costs of those animators after our film is done. We can go to the next studio and figure out what's the best possibility. And then ultimately, the incentives are in line in which they're a third party creator for us. They're aligned and incentivized from a budget level all the way down to our producers. Our producers are aligned on delivery date and staying within the budget framework. Then, as far as structuring the budget, one of the other benefits that we have in the animation standpoint, as far as budget overruns, I have some good friends that have been in production on a film, and the film itself, there was some, and this is not totally out of the ordinary, but the film itself was having some issues. It wasn't playing quite right. Audiences weren't responding the way they thought they were. And that's a really difficult thing to fix when the movie's done. And there's really only two ways to fix it. One, you can try to figure out a way to recut the movie so that it plays different on the screen. But you can only cut with what you have. And so ordinarily what ends up happening is they end up doing what are called reshoots. So they have to bring the actors back, bring them back into specific settings, and they have to reshoot certain scenes of the movies. Unfortunately, that's not terribly uncommon in the live action space. In the animation space, we're in a unique position because we only start animating in really like the back fifth of our production schedule. That's the most expensive part, and that's the part where you could have those cost overruns. And so until we get to that back fifth, the previous four-fifths of the production process is actually preparing for the animation side. So on Dr. Dolittle, as an example, we're 2.5 months into production. We haven't hired a single animator yet. So what we do is our process is One is asset creation. So we say, what is Dr. Dolittle going to look like? Who are the characters? What are the settings? What are the scenes? All the way down numerically to how many characters are going to be on the screen and in the film. And then at that point, we go into the story structure. So we take the script, which ordinarily, if you were making a live action film, you'd be like, here's your lines, here's the setting, here are the actors, here's we're going to do it. Hopefully we get a good performance, et cetera, et cetera. From a story standpoint, we actually get an opportunity to watch the movie 4 times before it's animated. And so you're probably familiar with the storyboard process that you've probably seen on like a Disney or a Pixar on the wall, where they have the film essentially acting out behind them. And you put together what is like a rough version of the film. So it's very lightly animated in what we call an animatic. So we get to sit back with a scratch track with actors actually playing the role, and we get to watch the movie. And we get to identify that's working, that's not working. It's running too long in this scene. It's running too long overall. And we can make those changes in essentially a rough draft sketch version of the film. And we have 4 bites at that apple in our production process, such that when we get to the animation process, I don't want to say it's set it and forget it, but it's essentially set it and forget it, because we have the entire film all the way down to a single frame sequence. We have all the characters, we have all the scenes, we have a complete artistic program, so that there is essentially, if there's any surprises at this point, they should only be good surprises. There's no bad surprises. And so to date, we're on time, under budget. And then we build in a little bit of wiggle room on the budget side as well. And then we have additional partners, other funds that exist out there who want to participate in our films, and we have access to tap into that capital and try to maximize and de-risk the fund capital that's in those films. Long answer to a short question, but animation is really, really unique in this space, in that we essentially get to watch multiple rough drafts of our film before we get to the really expensive part.
Great. Appreciate that.
Well, as we're beginning to wrap up, I just want to make a couple of other points. The investment will be made directly with Sycamore Studios if you're interested in participating. Please let your advisor know, and we will ask the Sycamore team to send you a DocuSign link to complete the subscription documents digitally. You can also reach out to Christian directly at christian@sycamorestudios.com. Subscriptions are due by June 18th, and most capital is expected to be called before the end of July. Probably 2/3 of capital called by the end of July, and then probably the remaining amount with probably one capital at the end of the year or the first part of 2027. One other point that I'd asked Christian about previously was around, is there going to be a closed interest catch-up charge to investors? And this is the first close was completed in January 2025. Christian confirmed that investors that are coming in now will not have a closed interest charge. So getting to see the slate of films that are in process or in development, and not being a charge for coming in later. So Christian, any last comments before we wrap up?
No, I would just say, and I'm Austin-based. Our team is, for the most part, all Texas-based. So if anyone ever wanted to kick the tires in person, I'm more than happy to meet with anyone, any advisors. And yeah, as you referred to it, Chris, we had a lot of investors come in early where it was a vision and a team, and they were investing in it purely from a venture standpoint. I'm investing in the team, and I'm investing in the strategy. And what we've been able to show really over the last 9 months is, here's the strategy coming to life. And as part of that strategy, we're already putting something into production, so we know that movie's going to get made. We are continuing to acquire additional IP, and then Madeline, which was, has kind of, not to be hyperbolic, but sort of reverberated through the industry. The family that we acquired those rights to turned Walt Disney down to his face twice, and he gave him the Mary Poppins pitch. So we're in a very, very unique opportunity. We've been very blessed every step of the way, and we've got a tremendous number of LPs who've already signed on, some of which are famous names in Silicon Valley, famous names in Manhattan, values-aligned folks, oil and gas investors, real estate investors, and a lot of folks across the board. So we'd be honored to continue the conversation, and just want to thank Chris, Matt, the entire Erica, the entire 1900 team. It's been a real pleasure and an honor, and would be really honored to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks everybody for joining today, and we'll conclude our call. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everyone.